Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, Steve. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. So I'm delighted to have Adriana set the stage so well for data-driven marketing and how powerful creating those customer experiences are. We live in a time that is so exciting, and I feel very blessed to have been in marketing, just for 3 or 4 years, because I'm really very young. But for all the years that I've been in marketing, I feel like I could have said, this is a great time to be in marketing, right? And it is true today, right? This is a great time to be in marketing. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. And as we introduce ourselves, I'm going to ask them to basically rank on a scale of 1 to 10 how your current analytics and customer experience prowess would fall in that 1 to 10 continuum. So quick intro, and then your ranking. Todd.
Thank you, Stephanie. Todd Cullen here from Ogilvy and Mather. I've been on the job about 1 month, so clearly an expert on the agency side. I spent about 10 years at Acxiom Corporation. Before this, some of you will recognize the Acxiom name, working on building global data products and analytics services. On the scale, I would say from a client perspective that I've had maybe 20 or 25 client meetings so far, and probably of our top 40 global brands, I'd say probably 10 to 15 or so of those clients are pretty sophisticated when it comes, maybe a 7 or above, when it comes to analytics and using data to drive content and interactions. The rest are very brand focused and aspirational, we'd say, and probably, I'd hate to put a specific number on it, but let's say less than 7. How about that?
Okay, fair enough. Kevin?
Hi, my name is Kevin Geraghty. I'm responsible for advanced analytics and decision sciences at 360i. We're a digital-centric agency. And interesting question. I don't want to brag on 360i. We are very focused on analytics. We're really driven by our customers, though. Some of our larger customers wouldn't say they'd have nothing more to learn, but a lot of them, I'd give them a 9 3/4 in terms of really pushing us to find the multiple needles in the multiple haystacks we're hacking through. Then sort of the more mid-range, I think there is perhaps a self-selection when people come to us that they intend us to take a look at their data.
Great. So because they're working with you, you think your customers are on the higher end of that scale?
I think so. I think that definitely happens.
Okay, great. Raghu?
Hi, my name is Raghu Kakarala. I'm CTO for Engauge, and Kevin and I work within a block and a half of each other in Atlanta. So I'll be walking down the street talking to some of those sophisticated clients, hopefully, hopefully soon. As far as on that scale, it's interesting. Let's talk about the positive first. There's a couple of clients of ours that I think are both equally sophisticated in completely different industries. So we work with Cisco, we're the global social agency for them, and if they didn't invent big data, at least they're profiting tremendously off of it. And I think they're very sophisticated in their use of data. I don't think anybody's a 10, so let's call them a 9. But another large client of ours is Food Line. They're a huge grocery chain, mostly in the Southeast, kind of going into Texas, if not the South. But they are extremely sophisticated. They're a grocery store. They have all the data, and all the way down to segmenting, to the email lists, to how they set pricing and dynamically do everything. They're amazingly sophisticated. They're a grocery store. So here's the hot West Coast firm, and then here's this staid Southeastern grocery store, and they're both 9s. And we have a lot of other clients that we're slowly trying to make them that way.
Great, thanks, Raghu. Anita.
Hi, Anita Shaw from Union Bank in San Francisco. I've been there for 2 years, and e-marketing, digital marketing is brand new to the company. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably be fair in giving them a 3. So before
That's
that,
honest. We appreciate honesty.
Yeah, that's probably why I'm here, right? To hear what you guys have to say. So.
Hi, Jason Smith. I'm with Holt Cat. We are a heavy equipment dealership in Texas, so Caterpillar is where the cat comes from. my role is all things digital. I've been there about a year and a half. They were a client since about 2008. And then developing an inside sales group to focus on what we're calling retail customers, which is about 8,000 customers that make up 5% of the revenue. 500 customers make up about 95% of our revenue. So where would we be? About a 3 or a 4 in using data. That's where I would put us.
That's great. You know, it's interesting. I applaud you guys for your honesty and approach. You know, DMA does a quarterly business review. It's a research available on our website. If you're not members, I'm happy to send you a sample. But we ask marketers to rate themselves in a variety of different types of programs and stuff like that. And it's really interesting because the question is always, how would you rank the industry on how it does, you know, great analytics-driven customer experience, right? And then how would you rate yourself? And the answers always come back that the industry is at like a 3, but myself, we're 9s. Yeah, so it's really interesting how you guys are being completely honest about, you know, where you are in that continuum, because I think it is a journey in a lot of ways, and there's so much going on in terms of how analytics is changing our world, you know, that it's good to embrace that, right? And so you have like a high ramp up. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and I would add, it's interesting because with that question, I asked a couple folks, and I would say there's discussions a lot on how do we get to 8 or 9,
right?
But we're not there yet.
And the goal may not be to get to 8 or 9, you know, first, right? It may be to advance some learning or something. Raghu, did you want to?
Well, I think one thing I see as far as our clients, and maybe you all could weigh in, is I find industries that are really margin constrained care more about data and look at the numbers far more deeply. So that's the driving concern for Food Line, even compared to a grocery store, which is already thin margins. Mm-hmm. They're really thin margins. You know, maybe they can eke out a 4 or 5% margin on all the stuff they do. So data really matters.
Mm-hmm.
It's also familiarity, right? So grocery chains have been among the leaders in data-driven merchandising, right, for a long, long time, right? Yeah. So they have a culture probably in the organization and that helps as well, right? Yeah. So let's talk about what's really happening in this idea of data-driven customer experience or data analytics or real-time marketing. So we're gonna go down the row again, and Jason, maybe we'll start down there with you if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just to shake things up. So what's the coolest thing that you guys are doing with data today? Sorry, it's a hard question. Yeah. You know, that you can share that kind of illustrates, you know, the opportunity and what's happening.
Well, we have, I would say, 2 camps of what our data is. So we have data about the customer and what they do and that sort of thing. Then we have data from all the equipment they use. And so from a marketing standpoint, how do you know that? So the equipment, think OnStar, those something you might be familiar with. So we've built a war room with that's a good name, to war room. It's not that much of not that impressive, but it's a room with you know, the extra space with a handful of people, and they're looking at data that's coming from the equipment and how the customers are using it. So from a customer experience standpoint, a cool thing we're doing now is using a specific aspect of when operators of the machines shut down a certain button to keep an emissions process from happening, because they don't like dealing with that anyway, it can potentially cause shutting it down enough of an $8,000 to $12,000 repair and put them out of work and that sort of, I say, downtime. So we have a group who's watching that, and then they can potentially predictively make a call and be on site to stop that repair from happening. So that would be a use.
So customers must love that, right? So customers are like, wow, you just prevented me 3 weeks of downtime and an $8,000 repair job.
Correct, yeah.
Right.
The owner especially, yeah.
Right.
Or
Exactly.
whoever writes that check.
The worker might have wanted that
Yeah.
3-week vacation. So I have to say, though, it was really interesting because Jason and a couple of us were sitting around last night, and you know, you talk about these big machines and, you know, the trucks and all this really cool stuff that Jason works with and the company produces. And I'm looking around the table, and I confess it was all men, right? But I'm looking around the table and everyone's going like, wow, tractors. You know what I mean? Like, there was this whole kind of tractor envy thing going on. So you work in a cool business.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's...
Tractors. All right, who doesn't want a tractor? Come on. Like no hands, right? No, everybody wants a tractor. All right, Anita, what's the coolest thing that you guys are doing with data-driven customer experience?
Well, we launched social media about 2 years ago, and I would say that has been influential in the way that we look at customer experience, because we can see, obviously people are going to complain more than they compliment you, but that feedback is forcing conversations internally to address things more proactively than they may have in the past. Bankers want to have real-time face-to-face conversations. They don't want to have social media conversations. But when we start sharing with them some of the things that are happening, we just finished an acquisition of a smaller bank, and there's a lot of people that have been very badly disrupted in that process. They're not getting their ATM cards on time. A lot of things we promised are not happening for certain people, and they're vocal about it. So sharing that back to the folks that are part of the acquisition process can allow us to apply that for future acquisitions. And we're in an acquisition mode, so this is going to keep happening over and over again.
Yeah, and that sounds like a great start too, because even though it's not like a real-time decisioning engine or something like that, you are using those insights to then make better decisions with your customers, and so that has a very clear impact on the customer experience, and hopefully in a very positive way.
It does, and I don't know if anybody else is in a bank, but DDoS attacks are getting more and more popular. We've had some, and other bigger banks have more than we do, but we often now are having customers tell us the site is down before we know it's down. So that chain reaction allows us to be more proactive in the way that we get the site back up or solve for that.
Right, and if customers start to see too that you're paying attention and listening and engaging with them through those channels, then that's just another way, and it's less expensive, I would assume, than phone calls and other things.
That we can't track yet. We're working on it, but yeah.
And you're
absolutely.
also in a regulated industry, right? So
Right.
that complicates everything that you do.
Everything is slower. Yeah,
Right.
Everything needs, the chain of command is very, very long for crisis management. It should be fast, but every decision has to go through a variety of people for those type of things.
Right. So good for you then for getting that started. Raghu, what's the coolest thing you're seeing?
Oh, coolest. That opens it up a little bit more. One really cool thing I see, actually, I look at some of the work we've been doing for Cisco, us and the other agencies. I mean, we're only the social media agency for them. But together, we're using the idea that data, in some ways, is the creative, right? Because when you talk about connecting all the things that are unconnected right now, every tree should be online, every stoplight, everything. We're about creating more and more and more data and more knowledge. And so how do you surface that and visualize it? So Cisco has something every year they call the Visual Networking Index, or VNI. And it could just be a boring set of numbers, but if you use infographics, if you use videos, if you use different ways to share the stories behind all of this, here's something incredibly complicated that you've just transformed into something really intriguing and piques the interest. And it's very social and very shareable, and sometimes you can kind of make it into snippets and snacks of creative that's great for social, or you can do longer form things like white papers and longer videos. So the data is the story behind everything, and that's the amazing piece. There was a piece we did about cows in Belgium having chips implanted in them so you could see how they've walked and they've fed. And then you could tie that into the alarm clock for the farmer for when to wake up and do an order, and where the trains are doing and where this is going. And it transformed to this wonderful little story, but behind the scenes it's data. So we're visualizing that, showing that, and making data the star in an interesting, creative way, which helps fuel sharing, because you share because you thought it was interesting.
Yeah, and I think, many of us struggle with, trying to understand our customers who are humans, right? So if you're that farmer who's trying to understand your customer who's a cow, you know what I mean? Like, that must be kind of challenging.
Well,
use that data, seriously.
We should all be online.
Right.
I'm wearing my Google contacts.
The internet
right
doesn't
now,
know
actually.
that you're a cow. Right, exactly. Good. Kevin.
It's really along the same lines. It's that the coolest thing is being able to listen to the customer's voice in the data. And I guess a couple of good examples, certainly in the generation of, let's say, creative and paid media, tapping into social and pulling the sort of, oh, that worked in a post. One of the things that was fun recently was just tapping into various APIs like weather and changing your bids in paid media on the basis of, you know what, it's getting cold. Those parkas might start selling. Let's start ranking and search for those.
Yeah, and a lot of weather-driven stuff too, right? So you see a
Yes.
lot of both email as well as social, where the subject line is related to, you just had a flood, or there was, all this crazy weather we've been having has created a bunch of opportunities, right? So, good. Todd, what do you got?
If I had one slide, now we're slide light today, thank God. But if I had one slide, I would picture two circles on a Venn diagram: intent and content. And the coolest things that we're doing, and again, I've been at Ogilvy a month, and I've seen some cool stuff so far. And in that intent and content framework, we're doing some very cool stuff in detecting intent from certain publisher sites, about 2,000 publisher sites, that are directly related to, in terms of the content and the signals on those pages, back to one of our largest B2B clients' product lines, right? There's 500 plus product lines. And we're doing some very cool analytics work, pulling those intent and in-market signals around certain categories. Let's say it's cloud computing or marketing automation, whatever it might be. So that's pretty cool. What's even cooler is our social at Ogilvy team is creating specific content almost on the fly to put in the hands of this client and our own marketing execution teams to push to those intenders in a very interactive sort of a safe haven sort of environment, but highly relevant and certainly something like real time.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think one of the benefits of having all of this data is that we can, in theory, make better decisions, right? So if we understand our customers better, then we should be able to create better experiences because we know them better, right? But one of the things that we didn't really talk about here is scale, right? So when you start thinking and contemplating about real-time decision making, right? You're processing a lot of that data at scale, right? And so that's where it starts to get really complicated. So, Raghu, do you want to sort of talk about what that means when you're dealing with these huge quantities of data, and how does that translate to the real-time nature of what you're trying to do?
Sure. The wonderful thing is because of all the data, you should buy more networking gear and, sorry.
Yeah.
So there's two things I think that complicate it. One is scale, and then one is sort of the kind of 24-hour cycle of things right now, especially if you're global or you sell in different geographies. On the scale issue, sure, technologically there's a few different things that are going through, but ultimately we're solving a lot of the technological problems with marketing. Whether it's using some technologies, if anybody's heard of Hadoop, maybe not. But anyway, there's a lot of these technological solutions to it, but ultimately the goals are what you're setting. Are you going to act? What's your time frame for acting? Do you want to act instantaneously, the next day, the next week? And then you can actually simplify the data problem down to the window that you want to act on it. It's only when you really want to act on it, when you want to act on something right away, you're not doing deep analysis, you're doing fast analysis. So I think it actually gets a little bit easier. When you actually want to do real actions and a real plan to transform the way you do pricing, or to go from everyday low pricing to like sales, boy, that's tough. And you have a longer time frame to make your decision, but you really had to deeply analyze it, scrub out all sorts of abnormalities, find out why something's happening, and then really have conviction behind what you're doing. So I think real-time marketing is a little bit easier dealing with volume of data because you're skimming the top, but deep actionable things that you actually have a few months to think about is really where the volume of data gets to be an issue.
And so what's the process for that? So I don't know, Todd, if you want to jump in on this as well, but so that sounds cool, right? So I have some decisions that I make because they are they're shallow, right? I use shallow amounts of data, and then there's other decisions that are going to really be impactful because I'm using deep data. How do I decide which decisions are possible to make and where I'm going to get that data and how I prioritize that data, right? So what's that? Does that take a really long planning process up front, or is there a way to kind of get started? And what's the process for that?
A really long planning process. I'm sure Anita can talk to you about that.
Well, we're doing something a little bit different. We're working with a startup called Beacon. I don't know if anybody's heard of them yet, but they're what we have is a lot of disparate data. We have all these little campaigns. I think we work with, there's about 50 lines of business. We probably work with half of them on digital campaigns, and a year ago, none of them were doing digital. So everybody wants to know everything quickly, but you really can't tell how one effort is performing against another. The relationships aren't there yet. There's not enough to see, and pulling out spreadsheets and comparing one thing to the other with display and search is tedious, and we just don't have the time. So we're working with this company to just dump everything in and then allow us to lay over search versus display in the aggregate and then break it out by line of business and start being able to see patterns and where we should put more emphasis and where we can put less emphasis. But we still don't have a lot in the way of conversion online. And everybody pretty much wants to go to a bank or talk to a banker, so there's a gap there in the process. But this seems like a presentation layer that will allow us to think differently and more quickly. So this is our perspective on it.
Hey, I'd throw in as well, and Stephanie, the way you framed it, I like the, I use a graphic sometimes of a pyramid. There's no rocket science here, but the deep sort of longitudinal data that we talk about, and it's pretty tempting to get wrapped around some discussions on real time and actions and offers and transactions and all that, and that's great, and we should always think about that. I'm starting to think more about, and to your point, the deeper levels of intelligence and discernment about people, not consumers. So I'm trying to think about people, and what's the trick there is a relationship. It's hard to build a relationship with someone if you even think about people in your life based on transactions. That happens, obviously, but at a deeper level, and the data that we collectively are collecting, I think is more useful over time to build a relationship, because a relationship does take time. We'd all say that's the business we're in, is building relationships. We get I know I get sort of sidetracked on, well, we've got to create transactions, and you have to do that. Transactions are more meaningful and longer lasting in the context of a relationship, which is easier to build, to the extent that we can dive into deeper levels of data.
Yeah, and there's the art and science of marketing, right? Yeah. So I think that, I'm no psychologist, but, consumers, people, all of us will say that, I don't want to be defined by my transactions, right? You don't know me. Like, how many times a day do we hear this, even among ourselves? Like, oh, well, that was targeted to me. I wonder why. Like, that's not me. They don't know me, right? But at the same time, our behavior clearly indicated through whatever algorithms are being used that does fit you, right? And so I think there's that interesting balance, right? And Kevin, you were saying something earlier about you find something that works, and I think the tendency of marketers, we all do this, is to be like a lemming and follow that thing, suck it dry, right? And so sometimes that's not the best strategy, right? Like letting it be a one-time pleasant event, and then you don't have to repeat it 300 times, right? So I think that there's this balance between art and science in marketing that we have to find that, right? And I think some of it comes out in which comes first, the creative or the data, right? We have those discussions all the time. But I think it also comes into, we have to set these business priorities and then think about how the data informs them, as opposed to just looking at what the data is spouting out. So Raghu, go ahead.
Well, look, I'm a math major that got into marketing, so I would like to think that science would trump everything. But ultimately, at the end of the day, for a lot of it, we're getting people to want to spend some money on things that they don't actually need, especially depending on the product that we have. So creative will always have a bit of a trump card on there. If creative leaks out of advertising, I'd ship my pants.
Can I ask, the relationship piece I think is extremely important, and using the data, how do we do that? And one of the things that we've heard, so we have customers, we're an 80-year-old company. Every month at our organization, a salesperson has a 40-year anniversary there. 3 generations of ownership come every day. And so how do you think about customers, and those relationships is a big deal. We said one of the 42-year veterans says salespeople know their customer, their wife's name, that gives you a perspective, and their hunting dog. So That's data, that's customer data to them. Well, as we've talked to customers, they've said, yes, I want a relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean you show up and bother me on my job site. It might mean you look at what I'm doing and you call me and you tell me, I recognize you're doing this, or you send me an email that says, click here if you'd like to renew your warranty, or...
Yeah.
And so that's the relational piece that I think they've told us, if you prove that to me, and I know you've done the legwork, then my relationship is stronger, even if I never saw you face to face.
Right, and your challenge is interesting too, your personal challenge in your work, because you have all of those, those 95% of your revenue customers who have had a relationship with a person, and it hasn't been a digital relationship with Holt Cat, right? And so you're changing that. You're adding something new, right? And change is hard. But then for that 5% of customers who don't have that level of hunting dog relationship, right? Then there might be more opportunities. But I think too, you bring up a good point, Jason, and something I wanted to talk about here is when you think about implementing a program that is going to be very customer centric, and they're going to use analytics to drive customer experience. We normally think about that in three pieces, right? You think about people, processes, and technology, right? And so we have to have the right combination of all those things, blah, 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 right? So let's talk about the people part of that, right? Because I think that, that's where, to me, that's the cornerstone for the whole thing, right? If you can't get the people part right, Adriana was talking about a program that is successful because she has an incredible level of trust with her people, all the way up to the CEO of the company, right? Like, that's really incredible and rare, I think. So how do you create this sort of like analytics-driven culture in organizations that maybe have been around for a long time, or in banks and regulated industries that hasn't been there before, and that will actually be very customer-centric and become rote? You know what I mean? Like what can we do as marketers to kind of get that happening? Todd, you want to say
I think for us, and some of these guys have some even more exciting things to talk about on this point. I think for us, Ogilvy has maybe 250 analysts across the world who are today performing, what we'd probably call post-campaign analytics, measurement, and BI, and it's pretty boring, right? I've talked to all these people. They're like, yeah, this is just not. I'm an analyst. I'm a math major, and I'm producing PDF reports with charts and graphs. Now, while clients look at those work products and are very impressed, the people who are actually producing that work are not as excited as they once were, or they could be. So one of the things that I'm trying to do with our analytics culture, and again, it's very strong, right? David Ogilvy was one of the first direct marketers. It's a strong part of our heritage and our DNA as an agency. We are data driven. But the people who are the data people are still sort of getting there. So one of the things that we've been working on to rebuild that culture is really the work, and expanding the definition of analytics further back in the chain around segmentation and propensity models, and the rest of what we would think of as the full analytics capabilities suite. And actually identifying specific clients and scoping projects and charging money and actually delivering value to clients. That's where I think for us the pivot will be between just sort of the day-to-day routine and what's really fulfilling. And the other thing that we're adding on to that is a mapping back to some of the new sexy roles and titles, right? Data scientists and marketing Sherpas and whatever you want to call it. That is surprisingly to me pretty exciting to a lot of people as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The DMA has a foundation, like many trade associations. They have a foundation, a nonprofit, and ours is around getting the best and brightest of people to come into direct marketing roles in the world, right? So it's about engaging those young people coming into our industry, and the titles and stuff that are out there. We did this list, but there's analytics ninja is actually a title that shows up on the chart. Like a lot of people have that title. It's astonishing to me, right? And so, Steve thinks I have a cool title. I mean, these are cool titles, right? So I think you're right, like this whole idea of the data scientist being the sexiest job of the 21st century, right? I mean, clearly our whole culture is moving in that direction. But I think it's one thing to have that outside influence, another thing to kind of have it internal, right? And so, I don't know, Kevin, if you want to talk about how this analytics culture is being built within your client organizations.
Yeah, I think analytics is fun, sexy, cool. Yay, did I get one there?
We get an amen.
Ever since Einstein poked his hair out and made himself into a personality. And I think there's a couple of aspects of driving that sort of engagement with analytics and its sort of culture effectively in an organization. One is, interestingly, the real-time nature of the data and the way it's being used now means that analytics people are no longer going off to a back room, come back in a month with a chart. You're actually part of solving the problem today. And so now you get analytics people with the demands on them is not to just produce a chart with some fancy sort of Greek letters, but to actually come up with creative business solutions, and the realization that creativity is actually part of an analytics solution is pretty important.
So inviting those folks to the table is a key part of it.
Yeah, and be part of the project team, be part of the solution rather than just a prop that's pulled in for a quick, answer this question in the way that you use resources like maybe legal or whatever, and top lawyers will be part of a solution as well. So I think analytics is more of that. We use client education a lot as a way of getting analytics people engaged with our clients, and also hopefully getting us in line with solving problems. So it ends up that we just have a better relationship between disparate people who used not get on too well when they were in high school, but now have a sort of joint objective.
Yeah, and I think, I think it was Uncle Ben in the Spider-Man movie who says to Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And so I think we as marketers have an opportunity to take on that mantle, right? So at DMA, we talk a lot about this idea of data stewardship, right? So if we are the department and we're the organization, scientists and creatives and social people, all inclusive, right? If we are the stewards of data for the organization, then we have a responsibility to use that data well, right? And so the responsibility lies with us. We cannot outsource this to the privacy guy, or we cannot outsource this to legal, right? Like we, the marketer, have a responsibility to this. And DMA has started the whole Data-Driven Marketing Institute, DDMI, to encourage marketers to take up that mantle, because who better? Who else cares about the customer more than we do? But I do think that this is a big challenge for us as marketers, because we want to be rapid, we want to get to market, we want to create those great experiences. We don't want to be hindered by the lawyer who's always going to say no, right? So how is that getting folded into this idea of an analytics culture? Kevin and Raghu are both looking at me, so go ahead.
Well, I think probably the biggest thing holding back an analytics culture at most companies is unfortunately, the analysts are too analytical. If you just scrub just a bit of that off of you, I think what you'll find is when you talk about like test and learn, if you put too much emphasis on the learn, you don't have an action-oriented way of going to market or trying things. You had to shift a little bit more of the emphasis to test and be okay to fail, because an 89 on a test in high school is not so bad. You'll make it up on the next one. Don't feel like you had to be perfect every time, because if tonight LeBron wants to be 10 for 10 from the field, he didn't shoot enough. You have to try. You have to fail a little bit. You have to get some of that stuff out. And analysts want to lay back and make everybody realize that they were right. By trying to keep being right. What you have to do is, be a little bit more action-oriented. I mean, you were talking about in high school. It'd be great if you could say, well, can't you realize that in 20 years I'll still have all my hair, have a really good job, and be a really good, partner for you? Why don't you ask me out now? It's like, no, you have to take a little bit of the risk and go out and find out, and occasionally fail. Then you can go back to your high school reunion. See, you still have all my hair, and I have a really good job. I'm a data scientist. But you can't just think that everybody will realize that. You have to, be willing to be wrong a little bit and scrub a little bit of the analyst off, and then the culture will go, and you'll meet in the middle, and you'll really start advancing and doing well. And that's how I think you drive an analytics culture.
And we appreciate your sharing so much of your personal experience with us, Raghu.
Nice hair.
So two good bits of advice, and Jason will go to you, but two good bits of advice there. One is, caution can be debilitating, right? And also that, having a prescribed way of failing fast with some protections around it is probably a good way to draw people out of their shell and build that collaboration and cooperation on the team, right?
Yeah.
Good. Jason?
Yeah, I also, I really do hope LeBron does not go 10 for 10 tonight. So, to kind of even go back a little bit from the analytics culture piece, so not only at Holt Cat, but I've worked with a lot of companies who were around well before the internet, auto insurance, brokerage, and so on. And what we found after banging our heads against the wall a lot is there's not even a concept, there's no slot for how analytics from a marketing standpoint even fit. There's no seat at the boardroom table very often, and so we've had to take a step back and create through contrast in some cases and say, well, you really love the financial data. Well, that's marketing data too. Let's help you understand how we do have data and bring that along so that people understand that we kind of had to make a place at the table to even have that discussion from a people and a relationship standpoint in the organization.
Yeah, and I'm finding too with a lot of marketers that I work with now is that this idea of a monthly update is so not working for any of us, right? So it doesn't work for the CMO who gets this information that's stale by the time she's presenting it, and it doesn't work for the team because it doesn't allow them to celebrate what it is that they're doing in sort of real time, right? And sort of learn as an organization, right? And so I think that comes back to that data stewardship and that data governance idea, right? Is that as the primary user and owner of the data internally, marketers have an opportunity to kind of be celebrating this in real time in the organization. And so this idea of a chart that goes up, that gets published as a PDF and gets sent around once a month, that doesn't work anymore, right? Like that's not a good way to infuse this energy and excitement into the rest of the organization, right? And so the technology has enabled us both from a customer-facing standpoint, but also from an internal-facing standpoint, right? And so I think that's a big part of it as well. So if we think about sort of people, process, technology, one of the things on the technology side is the mix, right? So what's the right mix of technologies in terms of what you're doing? And Anita was challenging us during our prep calls to think about what if you don't have a big budget? What if you don't have a sophisticated CRM system? Can you still use some of these learnings? Can you still act in this marketplace? So Kevin, you want to address that one?
Yeah, my favorite technology story comes from NASA. When they were launching the moonshots, were trying to invent a pen that could write in outer space, and it cost about $2 million to make that pen. And of course, the Russians were in the space race at the same time, and they brought a pencil. And right?
That's awesome.
I'm hiring the Russian analyst, right? If you rank your business opportunities or your analytic projects by the business impact they're going to have, that's what matters. And then, oh yes, this one, number 2 is a lot cheaper than number 1. Go with number 2 and number 5 rather than the more expensive ones. But yes, these sort of massive investments in technology, you need to be very careful about, and don't blow these sort of opportunities that can be done on your laptop.
Yeah, good point. So we'll be happy to take questions from the audience if you have them. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep going. So just raise your hand if you have something you want to ask this amazing panel.
Can I just interject too?
Yes,
that while we don't have a lot of in-house data, we rely on our agencies a lot for the staffing that we don't have. We see them as an extension of our team. In working with various DSPs, and I'm not a huge proponent of going all the way with DSP, so to speak, but what's interesting is when you get your performance reports from your agency, it's a top layer, top result, and it's kind of like, oh, that's interesting, the CPM's lower, and it is performing better, but I would suggest having a conversation with the DSPs themselves, because they actually have a boatload of data, a lot of information about where the trends are, what's working, what's not working. And I know I just was really surprised. I was like, you need to pull this data forward and share this back with the agency that we want to see this. And we want to see it in a way that tells us what to do next with it and how to cultivate that audience that we've started investing in.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my learning pretty recently.
And by DSP, you mean?
Demand side platform.
Great.
I don't know, I think someone from Turn is here. We work with Turn. Hi. And that's really been helpful in solving to some of the so whats that we get. You know, when you show data and you don't tell people so what, you're just showing them a bunch of data.
Right.
So
Right.
that's been helpful.
I would throw into that question too around the technology and requirements, people, process, technology, and data requirements. So we look at those 4 dimensions from a solution standpoint. So from a technology perspective, couldn't agree more. We did a deal when I was at Axiom with a DSP that I won't name. We made a lot of money by distributing our data online. Everyone loved that. When I asked for a report, I got a spreadsheet with 1 column and about 10,000 rows. Everything was crammed into one place, and so the reporting the performance from a financial standpoint was great. From an actual performance at a campaign level, it was terrible. So that has I think sparked in me and probably a lot of you to think about technology requirements, reporting requirements, and data requirements. And I think to the point here, there's no need to invest millions of dollars in technology platforms, given the fact that half of the audience is startups and other cool companies who are doing a lot of this that just wasn't possible a few years ago. So this massive investment for infrastructure, there's going to be some of that. Some of that's going to be required from a data governance standpoint, but from a performance standpoint, solution standpoint, not sure that's required. And I think maybe are we getting the?
No, go ahead.
Okay, no, that's all.
So to build off of that, are marketers and their agencies and vendors kind of getting along better these days than in the past? I mean, is the advent of all this data making it easier, better, more complicated? Jason, how do you think that's working?
I think the short answer is I don't know. But I think that with all of these things, there's very specific niche areas, I think, where there's opportunities for agencies to come in, do a good job. It's very tangible for a lot of people, and then potentially grow from there. So I think that's where, handled correctly, I think that's where there are big benefits for good relationships to develop and grow. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Good. Anybody on the agency side want to?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So when I was a kid, I had a job where I had to go back and forth between the CMO and the CFO and get them ready for their monthly meeting and have them both go in and say things are up or things are down, and it was an impossible job way back then. And that aspect of marketing always reporting, hey, we're killing it, and the CFO coming back and saying, oh no, we're losing our shirts. I've definitely seen that die down dramatically over the past few years because of not just the availability of data, but the actual agreement around what data means, that people are much more savvy, and you can actually have that conversation. Oh yeah, okay, yes, we did sell out the loss leader, but we can also show that it had benefit. And so, yeah, I think it's much better thanks to the availability of data.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Steve, did you have a question from out there?
I wanted to follow up on the relationship question.
Is Steve live over there?
Because Jason, you raised an interesting point. We throw around the term relationship all too easily, and it may sort of lead some brands to believe that really people do love them when they don't, and they don't need to. But you seem to be learning from your customer what kind of relationship they wanted. That one of the first things you can learn from this back and forth of data is letting the customer tell you what kind of relationship do I want to have with my machine provider or my bank or my diaper seller. And those may all be very different, but the data has to sort of be used to help understand what sort of relationship does a customer really want with any of these brands.
I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and say, I think I'll have a brand experience today, right?
I would say with that, it's interesting. I'm reading a book now called Customer CEO. A guy named Chuck Wall wrote this book, and he talks about big data and big insight. So he argues you need to marry the big insight, those more intimate customer settings where you get their feedback, with the data that you know, and marry those things up. But so we did a study before we started embarking on a social plan last year, and asked customers, what kind of information, if you wanted to interact with us in a social setting, what would be helpful for you to get? And we learned a few things that were we didn't expect. One of them was, help me price my used equipment I want to get rid of. We never thought about that. So how do we then, and now if we can marry that up with, well, what are they really doing with their used equipment through other reports? There's public records of financing of used equipment, and we can match that up. So what we're trying to do that more, to validate what we're doing. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
I would probably add on to that in the sense that the relationship, the relationship issue is a huge one. If you think about, we as people, you can't have more than, 5 or 10 at most, maybe very close relationships with other people. But you have, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 friends on Facebook. And those are different types of, I'm not even sure I would call those relationships, right? From a brand perspective, I think it's the same way. I interact with, maybe only a few brands very intensely. I think this pivots over to the discussion about data and who owns data, how do we get data, where does it come from, what do we do with it? The brands with whom I have a very close relationship, Nike is one, right? Nike knows a lot about me. I run, I do a lot of other things. Nike knows all that. I don't think about Nike as a brand. I think about that as just as part of what I do, just like I do with my close friends who I don't think about transactions and interactions and what I can get or give. I just think about in that context, I'm willing to give a lot of information for value from the friend or from the brand. And I think our the brands that we support, that we serve, want to know people, and people want to be known. And in that context, if you think about 5 or 10, that's probably reasonable. And in those contexts, a lot of data can change hands as long as there's some value exchange.
I think that's a very good point. So we are out of time, but please join me in thanking this great panel, Todd, Kevin, Raghu, Anita, and Jason.